Hiring the wrong executive costs you time and money. Leveraging work psychology, Spirit Consulting helps you hire the right executive so you can focus on growing your business. For a free quote, visit spiritmco.com. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Tips for Team Building podcast, where our mission is to inspire and propel others along in their leadership journeys. I'm your host, Jaden Smith, and so excited to welcome Ivan Velazquez to the show. Ivan, thanks for taking the time. For those who don't know you, we always like to start with a softball. So who are you?
Jaden, thank you so much for having me. I'm obviously very excited to be here. So as you mentioned, my name is Ivan Velazquez, and I have the absolute privilege of being the Vice President of Operations for Specialty Dental Brands, which is a DSO that has a great national presence here, obviously in the U.S. But more importantly than that, I'm a father of two young boys, Conrad and Dexter, and married to my amazing wife and life partner, Anna Velazquez. Live here actually in the state of Wisconsin, but I am a Southern California native. So, my entire life, born and raised out in SoCal. But I got a phenomenal opportunity that brought me out here to the Midwest. Kind of my free time, I guess, if you were to talk about the things that I love to do and who I am as a person, love to cook, food. I definitely consider myself, quote, a foodie, as a lot of people use that term. Just huge fan of that. Big golfer, avid golfer, not very good, which most of us aren't. It's why I work for a living and don't play on the tour. And this is a kind of an interesting little tidbit. I'm a whiskey enthusiast. It's a big hobby and passion of mine. Have a decent collection for those people that know me. It's something that I just love. And really the spirit around the storytelling and just experiencing the whiskey with people that you love in the company, which I think is ingrained in who I am as a person, right? I love to be around people. It's what I love the most about my job. So yeah, it's kind of me in a nutshell, Jaden.
Awesome. And thanks, Ivan, for sharing. As you said that you're a self-proclaimed foodie and love to cook. What's your favorite dish to prepare?
That is, prepare and eat are two different things. I definitely can't execute. I'll answer the easier one. I know you asked me prepare, but I'm going to buy myself some time because that's a little more difficult to eat. It's definitely a really nicely cooked steak. I won't say well done because I don't eat it well done. Medium rare is definitely the way to go. Exactly right. And I think as far as preparing, right now my all-time favorite is making a nice rack of ribs. I love to cook them low and slow on the old Traeger. It's I'm by no means a professional smoker. I have to have one of the set it and forget it smokers, but I love that. I love making a nice rack of ribs with the dry rub. It's one of my favorite things to do right now.
Awesome. So Ivan, you kind of touched on your role at Specialty Dental Brands, being a vice president of operations, and would love if you could share with the audience kind of how you've arrived into the leadership position that you're in today.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think I always like to preface with, it's just an absolute honor and privilege being in the role that I'm in, right? I think about the responsibility and the amazing team of people that I get to partner with on a daily basis. Sometimes you reflect on the fact like, wow, I got to this point. It's a really incredible feat. And I always like to give credit where credit's due. I work my tail off, and definitely am a person that believes in you kind of make your own luck. And what I mean by that is, I think life, you don't know what curveballs and what opportunities are going to present themselves to you, and as they come, what you can do is try to be as prepared and ready as you can be, so when those opportunities present themselves, you're ready, right? And so I've been very fortunate to have had so many mentors and people that have, really given me a ton. From day one of my career, I've had people that have stuck their necks out for me and have invested time and effort in me. And I think being able to recognize that is a big component of who I am and where I am today. So it's been through a lot of hard work. And some of it's been just fortunate luck, right? I mean, I've been lucky, but I think to that, Jaden, it was all about being ready when those opportunities knocked and always thinking about that next step, right? Where do I want to be tomorrow? Where do I want, what's the next role that I want to take on and trying to prepare for that? And just, and I think, I think about like my first role into multi-site where I joined Smile Brands, another DSO based out of Southern California. It was always about taking on special projects and asking how I could take on more. It wasn't just about making sure that my market was performing at the highest, or, that, I was in the, top quartile of performers. Sometimes those things are outside of your control, but it's how did you make yourself visible as a leader? One of the best pieces of advice I got working even at DaVita was make yourself known, right? No one's going to be your biggest advocate other than you. Like, you have to stand up for yourself and make yourself known. So don't wait for someone to call on you. It's great when it happens, but raise your hand, right? Volunteer and ask, to take on challenges, step outside of your comfort zone. I think about just my career, my life in general. It's been a lot of like putting myself in very uncomfortable spots. One thing that a lot of people that don't know about me, because I usually do this pretty well, which is public speaking. I used to have panic attacks when it pertained to public speaking. I would, in undergrad, I would see a class that required a presentation at the end of the semester. Yeah, I'd think about, am I going to take the class or not? Right. And so I remember pushing myself to take a public speaking course. I remember myself volunteering to be the main speaker for my group project. So I pushed myself to do things that I knew were going to be required of me in the role that I wanted to be in. Right. And it's being okay and humble enough to recognize you're gonna make mistakes. Right. So I think that sort of mindset, coupled with the amazing people that I've had in my life and still have in my life today, are what allowed me and afforded me the opportunity to get to the role that I am today. And I hope that I'll continue to grow, right? That's my goal. And you and I have talked about this on many occasions, right? What those goals are. But again, if I'm not preparing for that next role today and that opportunity presents itself, I have no one else to blame but myself for not being ready. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
I love it. And from a fellow introvert, or someone who feared public speaking, getting in front of crowds, etc. I just want to, kudos to you for, here we are now on a podcast. It's going to go out to 30,000 plus people. So, no look pressure, at us go, right? Yeah. So, you mentioned, Ivan, kind of the mentors that you've been so lucky to have in your career. And, that's something that has been a common theme on the podcast is that idea of mentorship, both as someone who's benefiting from it, but then also someone who's providing it. And those seem to be, kind of like just a common step along in the journey of the people who are wildly successful are the people who seek out, support and assistance, who work their butts off, but then also go to, find out and learn from others. And so want to give kind of an opportunity for you to highlight maybe one or two of the most impactful mentors that you've had to, give them a shout out on the podcast today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's probably pretty corny, right? But I'm going to do, I think, what everyone's probably expecting, but my parents, right? My mom and dad, both are people that migrated to this country from a third world country that didn't have much to their name, right? And so sometimes mentorship is intentional and sometimes it's unintentional, right? And you have people that watch you and perceive you and look at you that you don't even know are looking, right? And I think that as a child growing up, right, we all idolize our parents and see them as superheroes. And then as you grow, right, that ignorance, right? And I said the word ignorance very thoughtfully there, because I do think that ignorance can be bliss at times, right? But we become very aware of the faults and the fact that our parents are human beings. But my parents mentored me in a way, and still to this day they do, that it's about that, nose to the grindstone. It's work, right? We live in a country where we're extremely privileged and we're afforded so many opportunities where others are not. Other countries, other people are not. And look, admittedly, it's not perfect. No country is, right? We know that we have many faults. But the one thing that I've always kind of had that I learned from my parents is not victimize myself, right? It doesn't mean that you don't acknowledge the challenges that are posed in front of us and the things that we're going to face that are hard. It might be easier for you, Jaden, to get to X than it would be for me, but it doesn't mean that there's not a path for me to get to X, if that makes sense, right? Whether it's getting to an Ivy League school or if it's working for a Fortune 100 company or getting to the C-suite, it may be easier for one person, but it doesn't mean you can't get there. And I think that the other thing that my parents taught me is that the world is not always fair and it's not always equitable. And I think making peace with that was a huge piece that my parents gave me. And it gives me that drive, right? So there are some things that I know I'll never be able to make, right? Or be able to become. I'm not going to be signing up for the NBA anytime soon. Didn't have it in me, right? It's just, I'm not very tall, pretty average, in height. So when you that and not very athletic. So those things coupled together, probably not going to play in the NBA. Didn't not cut out to be a surgeon, right? But that's okay. I'm not lesser of a person because of that, right? And so what my folks taught me is, identify something that's going to be right for you and then work your tail off to get there, right? There's no excuse, right? If my father and my mother, who came here from from Nicaragua, didn't speak a lick of English, can make it in this country and make it damn well, what's my excuse, right? If I'm born with an able body and able mind, there's really no rationale as to why I can't make it. Now, again, doesn't mean there's not barriers or roadblocks, challenges that I'm going to face. But I think that's what builds that character, that tenacity, that grit, right? That makes you the leader that hopefully you want to be and made me the leader I want to be. So definitely my parents. Another person is Jeff Hamill. This is a man that I had the absolute pleasure of working with when I was at Smile Brands. He was my VP. It actually, when I applied for this role, he was one of the people that helped coach me and gave me a ton of guidance. And he's the guy that I knew about servant leadership, right? You read about it. In theory, it sounds incredible. He was one of the first, if not the first person I saw live it. It was amazing, right? This was a man that was so brilliant. I mean, he had worked for Starbucks, 7-Eleven. He worked for some pretty big companies and he worked for Smile Brands and was amazingly impactful. You talk about an operator, but he did it through people. And it's kind of what's become ingrained in my philosophy as a leader is that I think that numbers are not what drive great people. It's great people that drive great outcomes, right? And so seeing him do it at a high caliber, and he's taking me under my wing, under his wing. He's, to this day, like I said, we still talk. But it's this notion that you can lead through people and you can still, you could be stern when you need to, but he was always fair. And he always wanted to explain the why behind the what. He's such a thoughtful leader. Everything he does is so intentional. And I've met many more like that, right? Gaurav Bhattacharya is another one. He's someone I work with at DaVita. He's a man that was one of the smartest people I ever met in my life. But he's a guy you could sit down and have a beer with, right? He was so humble and such a great leader that's like, okay, this is cool, right? As a younger leader, then it's like, so there are people that don't just rule with fear, because I've seen those, right? I don't think that's as successful. But then I saw these immense leaders that were so successful lead via people. And again, they will hold you accountable, but they did it in a way where you felt valued and you were part of the team. So even when they beat you up, right, you walked away from that conversation saying, hey, I'm better today and I'm better now than I was an hour ago. So those are the mentors that I think come to mind right away. And those are the takeaways that I was able to derive from those relationships, and still to this day am deriving from them.
Awesome. And so, Ivan, you've mentioned in chatting through their leadership styles, as well as in kind of your opening statement about just loving being around people and that being kind of the driving force for the work that you do. And obviously, relationships are so important in a leadership position, because, as you said, leading through fear only works, probably for short-term results, not long-term sustainability, right? And so would love to hear kind of your philosophy or your approach to how you build relationships as a leader.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's at the core of being a leader, right? I think that's one of the biggest delineations between being a manager and a leader is the ability to understand how important the human element is, right? And I think what's made me successful in my philosophy in leadership is that you treat every relationship and every leader as an individual, right? You have the golden rule, which is you treat others the way you want to be treated. But you and I have talked about a thing called the platinum rule, which is you treat others the way they want to be treated. I always kind of put a little asterisk next to that, like, within reason, right? You have to be reasonable. But what that does, and what I do, is that challenges me as a leader to get to know the individual I'm working with, right? How do they learn? What are they passionate about? What are the things they want to become, right? Not everybody wakes up one day and says, hey, I want to be a director of operations for a private equity backed dental service organization. Like a pretty standard thing, right? A kid says when they're growing up, firefighter, doctor, and then that. Most people don't, right? So a lot of people, by luck or by chance arrive here. It's like, look, organically, this is the role I landed in. So getting to know the individual in front of them, right? Getting to know Jaden, what motivates Jaden, right? What motivates you? What makes you who you are? I think that's part one. I think the second part is being genuine. People know. People know if you're not genuine, and people know if you're full of BS and you have this rhetoric of like, hey, I want you to take PTO and I want you to have this work-life balance. And you use all the cool catchphrases that are out there, and transparency and efficiency. And you use all these key words that the books told you to say. But then when the person comes to you and says, hey, I'd like to take a day off to be with my kid. And you're like, dude, we need to get this project done. Right. They're going to remember that. Right. And so I think when you're thinking about building that trust or building that relationship, you have to understand that it's very hard to gain trust. It's a lot easier to lose it. And then once you've lost it, it's even harder to regain. Right. So I think being cognizant of that as a leader makes me thoughtful in every interaction I have. So like there's this almost like hyper focus on how is my teammate feeling in this conversation, right? How are they feeling in this interaction? How did what I said, impact them? So there's like this obsession with getting to know my team and developing them, but there is a fine balance, right? At the end of the day, there are still expectations and things that we as a leader and as an enterprise need to achieve. So I do think that can easily be misconstrued of like, with the idea of like letting them do whatever they want. Absolutely not, right? People also crave structure and guidance and feedback. And so I think being able to balance that as a leader is how I'm able to gain trust and build that bond and relationship with my team.
Awesome. And I love that. I think, you oftentimes hear like philosophies on how to build relationships and how to initially gain that trust. But I love how you highlighted the fact that it is like a continuous process. It's something that you're continuing to, maintain or continue to grow that trust. And it's something that you always have to be mindful of, because just because you had a good relationship for their first 3 months, if you just totally drop the ball for the next 3 months, like that relationship might be lost, or the trust might be lost there. So I think that's super important to highlight.
I think you're spot on with that. It's a good call out. I almost equate it to, at least in my personal life, right? Not everyone's married, but it's similar to marriage, right? I mean, when you first start dating your significant other, you have these butterflies and there's these feelings of infatuation. Those feelings are very different than what that looks like in 15 years, right? My wife and I often talk about, like young love, right? You see these young couples that are just madly in love. And I'll tell you, I'm madly in love with my wife. She is my best friend. She's the best thing on the face of the planet before anything else, right? But the love that we have today is different than the love that we had when we first met. And I think that we were both at an early enough age in our relationship, cognizant enough that like love requires work, right? So any relationship requires effort and work. So what you said there about it's not just like a one and done checklist and now the relationship is good, it's going to sustain itself, we're good to go. No, like you need to put in daily work. And you also called something out that I think is very important, is inevitably at some point in every relationship, you're going to mess up. That's the reality. You have to make peace with that. You have to be okay with that. And a good servant leader acknowledges those misses, right? So I think part of the ability of a relationship to have longevity and health is not avoiding mishaps or missteps or arguments, right, for the sake of the marriage, comparison, but it's how do you react to that, right? How do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with issues that are inevitable? They're going to happen. So I think it's the same thing in leadership, right? One of the things that, you talked about the trust building and the sustaining of trust. It's, I learned, and it was one of the hardest things I learned, it's having tough conversations sooner rather than later. And I know it's like the corniest saying again, where it's like, yeah, I've heard it 1,000 times, but how often do you say to yourself, I got to have that conversation? Let me just kick this can down the road. Maybe it's going to go away. Maybe it'll fix it. I will give every single person out there this piece of advice. It's not going to go away. Two things for sure will happen. The problem's still going to be there. And your mind, your anxiety, your stress is going to make it bigger than what it actually was. I would say 8 out of 10 times, if not 9 out of 10 times, when I actually prepare and have that conversation, it is far less than I thought it was going to be, as far as the scariness of it, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things as a leader, you have to be comfortable, and maybe not comfortable, but you have to be okay with having that conversation. It is okay to have the feelings of, this is anxiety provoking. This is not going to be fun. Agree. It's what we get paid to do, right? If it was easy and fun all the time, hell, we, probably be a lot more of us doing this job. And so, but that is part of servant leadership, is telling that teammate, that person that you care and love for, good, bad, or ugly, that feedback for the sake of them improving and getting better. If you preface it with that, and your team understands where you're coming from and why you're giving that feedback, they're much more likely to receive that feedback in a positive way. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of expand on that, because I thought that was a really good call out, that a relationship is not just one and done. And it's for the duration of the relationship, it takes work.
Have you been feeling unfulfilled? You want to be happy, but just continue to struggle. One of the best ways to experience joy is by caring for the homeless. A charity I've grown to love, River of Light, food rescues 1 million meals per year for the needy in Chicago. Imagine how that makes you feel, knowing that you're helping feed children and veterans. To make a tax-deductible donation, visit riveroflightchicago.org. Again, riveroflightchicago.org. No one should go to bed hungry.
Yeah. And I think to just kind of follow up or piggyback off of what you said, a couple thoughts. I think one, just kind of made me laugh, because I saw a meme on LinkedIn the other day of a manager coming in and saying, hey, I have this problem employee, and HR's like, have you talked to them yet? Well, no, I haven't done that. It's kind of like you said, just kicking it, down the road. But I think that also, a piece of advice that, or something that I've kind of learned, and, much earlier in my leadership journey than you, Ivan, or others who, might be listening in. But I think that one thing that I've learned is oftentimes they know the conversation's coming. People who are dedicated to their work know when they're not meeting the expectation, and people who take pride in their work know. So when you have the conversation, they appreciate that, because then you're coming to them, you're calling them on it, and then you're brainstorming. But if you kick it down the road, it actually, I've seen it where it just makes them even more disengaged, because they're like, my leader doesn't even, I know that I'm dropping the ball, and my leader doesn't know that I'm dropping the ball.
It's a very good point. No, it's a good point. And I think you also intentionally or unintentionally set a precedent, right, for the rest of the team. So not only the individual, but for the rest of the team. And I think it also goes back to this relationship building is about level setting expectations and roles, and what the individual contributor is doing, individually and for the group. And then also what that relationship is going to look like with you. Right. And so by level setting those expectations and having, I think equally as important as a cadence for checking in. And I urge people, you shouldn't check in with your teammates any less than once a month, right? Especially at the executive level, if you have directors or, practice managers or facility administrators, guys, a lot happens in 30 days, right? And I always kind of, go back to like me as an individual. Like I'm a creature that craves feedback. Couldn't imagine a world where I didn't talk to my boss for 30 days, right?
Right.
And at least, and like thoughtful conversation around like, hey, this is what we need to focus in on, right? This is what's going well. This is what's not going well. And so we as leaders often are like, I want, why is my boss not checking in with me? Or I didn't have my PDR this year, or I didn't have my review yet. Flipped a coin, we don't do it for our team, and we think they should be okay with it, right? So it's always a very odd. I saw this happen with a ton of my teammates where they're, Ivan, hey, what's going on with my raise? Hey, what's going on with my review? And it's like, so it's gonna happen on time as promised, but you have like 5 PDRs that are like 2 months overdue. But I'm swamped, but you're the same person that's telling me the culture in your practice is not where it needs to be, right? So you have a third of your team doesn't know where they stand. And I'm going to guess that a third of your team has not had a check-in with you in any meaningful way in the last 6 months. And then you tell me that retention's not good and that it's because, the pandemic or because, Chick-fil-A is paying more money. Sure, during the exit interview, the teammate's going to give them the easy answer. But the reality is it's because they never knew where they stood. They never felt valued. You as a leader never took the time to communicate with them and get to know who teammate X is. And you didn't know that they felt like they didn't have time to take time off to be with their kids. So, a lot of things, it's just that communication with your teammates is just so immensely important, right? So it's not just about, hey, I'm going to check in and level set expectations, but how often are you connecting with them to calibrate where you believe they are and how they're doing. And again, it goes back to the initial point I made of the nuance, right? Every single person's different. Some people are going to just want it, very militaristic, hard and fast, like give it to me, tell me how I'm doing, boom, boom, boom. Some people are going to have to finesse it. But that's the beauty of being a leader, is that beauty and the challenge is that it is our responsibility to finesse that depending on the audience, right? So if I'm speaking to a group of doctors, I'm going to, that's going to be a little bit different than if I'm speaking to a group of operators, right? You have to tailor the message to the audience to ensure that if you're saying red, you're saying a color red, that the audience captures red and hears red. Because if the audience heard pink and you're like, that was a hell of a speech, I know they killed it, and the audience left with a different message, you didn't kill it. Right? That's the miss. And so you really have a good opportunity, especially in that one-on-one setting, to ensure that person's capturing what it is that you're trying to convey.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that one of the things we kind of, hit on in that dialogue was, giving feedback, having honest and open and candid conversations with teammates. And would love to hear, Ivan, about, if you could share with us a time, because I think that, you also highlighted that we all make missteps and we've all messed up. We've all, made mistakes, throughout our leadership journeys or within those relationships. Can you tell us about a time where you've, made one of those missteps in a performance management conversation, and kind of like what you were able to take away from it to now, kind of guide you in future conversations, that you have?
No, absolutely. I'll give detail, not too much, and I'll definitely leave names out for sure. But it's early on in my career, it was an annual performance review, giving a scale 1 to 5, given a 2 rating, right? Which means the individual is not going to get a bonus, they're not going to get a merit increase, and ultimately they're not performing, right? You had said something earlier that, often the teammates know it's coming. They know they're dropping the ball, yada, 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 right? And in this circumstance, this person did not. And so the misstep wasn't necessarily the actual conversation. The misstep was the culmination of all lack of conversations building up to that, right? So I blindsided this person. They didn't know. In their mind, I haven't heard anything. Ivan is not, my leadership. And it was one of those things where I transitioned into the role. So there was 2 leaders during that time period. but neither of us as leaders had done this person the service of actually communicating, hey, here are the expectations. Here's where you are. Here's what you need to do to get you to where we want you to be. And if that doesn't change, this is what your performance review is going to look like, right? And so in having that conversation, this person was rightfully very frustrated when it's like, hey, I did not know I wasn't doing my job. I thought this was the baseline. I know my numbers are struggling, but so is everyone else in the market. I thought that, we had made peace with this, and that was kind of the expectation because of X, Y, and Z that was going on in the market. And it's a similar thing to when we hire somebody new and an OM or a teammate comes to me and says, this person's just not cut out for the job, Ivan. It's like, okay. The first thing now that I ask myself is, okay, so what training and tools have we given this person, right? Have we given them a fair shake and a fair opportunity to be able to learn and do this job? Have we coached them in the areas where we feel that their shortcomings are? If we haven't done those things, then the person we need to kind of call out is not the employee. We need to call ourselves out as leaders, right? And so in that moment, in having that conversation with that leader, it was, and I didn't have the epiphany then. I wish I was that fast, right? It was a moment of, my God, I let that person down completely. It was 100% on me. Admittedly, they weren't doing their job, but how can I hold them accountable to not doing their job when I can speak for myself. I didn't lay out the foundation for what the job expectations were. And then to boot, I didn't follow up with this person and say, hey, this is where you're performing relative to my expectations. And so if I do that right, we have at least 11 meaningful conversations before I do that performance review, right? And so the performance review is merely a culmination of all those conversations. And it's no surprise as to why you got the rating you got. If you ever are surprised by a termination, or you're surprised by, a poor rating on a PDR, I mean, a multitude of things could be true that led to that happening, but typically it's going to be either you're a really crummy listener and you're just not self-aware and you don't heed the advice that people give you, or your leader didn't do a good job of conveying that message. And usually it's a combination of both, right? It's never black and white, but for the sake of, the explanation there. So yeah, I learned that you need to over communicate, right? I mean, I think you need to very clearly level set expectations as to like, hey, this is what success will look like, right? I often will tell my team when we're doing, our annual goal setting, it's if you and I are sitting down, having a glass of wine or pop, and we're saying, boy, 2023 was just an absolute stand-up year for us. We killed it. What are the things that we did to get us there, right? And I need to make sure that we're both aligned and calibrated on what those things are, right? It can't just be, I thought it'd be these three things and they thought it'd be these three things. And they went out and got after and did what they thought they needed to do, but it was not aligned with what I thought, right? So that's where that synchronicity, that partnership is really important. And then, like I said earlier, having those frequent check-ins, right? Hey, Jaden, it's January, end of January. How are you tracking towards the goals, right? How are you performing versus the KPIs that we had set versus the benchmarks that we had set? And then just having that, just relentlessly following up with your team, right? And some you'll follow up with only once a month, but maybe for some of the ones that are, not performing, you maybe have a more frequent cadence to check in with them, but you tell them why, right? This is intended to not micromanage. This is intended to elevate you and get you to where we both agree you need to be. Because I don't want any of this to come as a surprise. I jokingly tell my team this when people come to me and say, how do you deal with a termination? Terminations are hard, right? You never want to let somebody go. Maybe not never. Often you don't want to let someone go. But a termination, if you do it well, is no different than a promotion or a bonus, right? You earned it. And you had said, again, something earlier where most people will be self-aware. And if you do your job as a leader, the writing should be on the wall. And a lot of the time, people will be able to kind of gracefully exit themselves and say, hey, look, this is not for me. And that's okay. Like, you're not a bad person for it. It's just this job wasn't a fit for you, right? So yeah, I think it's about having that follow-up and ensuring people know where they stand. People deserve that. People want that. So those were the learnings that I took away from the misstep in conveying that PDR or that performance review.
I love it. So, Ivan, we've focused a lot on kind of like relationship building and performance management with like the team that you're leading, correct? But like as an executive, I think another great skill to have, and one that as a mid-level leader that I've pushed my team, and trying to challenge them is like as a leader, I know I want feedback as well, right? And it's especially like if in your role you're reporting to a COO or a C-suite team member, like oftentimes like that person may not have someone providing that feedback for them. So it's really kind of the obligation of their team to give them that feedback. So you have that responsibility to coach and develop your team, but also the responsibility to coaching up and holding others accountable, or coaching sideways and holding peers accountable. And would love to hear, because I'm sure it's a different approach potentially from, your team, kind of your approach to coaching up or sideways within an organization.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. It's been difficult for me, right? I don't think maybe it's not difficult for all, but it is definitely one of the more difficult things, because now you're providing feedback to maybe someone that did not, solicit that feedback. Like, hey, what's going on here, right? I think it goes back to the original point of just you have to know the individual, right? There's not, for me as a leader, there's not one set way of providing that feedback. And I think that's what's made me successful in that. I think the other part, and you're going to see a lot of ties in between these answers, because I just think that organically this stuff all kind of ties in. But I think the other thing is you have to build a relationship of trust with this individual. The reason why that's important is they need to understand where this feedback is coming from, right? I'm not here to undermine you. I'm not here to think that you're not good at doing your job. I'm not here to, undercut you and just, that's not it, right? The intent here is to build, kind of like the Kaizen mentality, right? Like this continuous operational improvement. But instead of the operational component, this is just continuous, human improvement, right? How do I just continuously get better as a person? And I think if you first build a good bridge of communication with the individual, then you're much more apt and able to provide that feedback. And one of the ways that I've been successful in being able to provide feedback to others is by first asking for feedback about myself, right? So that organically kicks off that conversation of like this two-way conversation, like, hey, Jaden, how can I do this better, right? And like, hey, Jaden, anytime, like I do this habitually with my team. And one of my directors, she cracks me up. She's on my current team. She'll message me, hey, here's the feedback, because I know you're going to ask me. And so like we'll have a call with a doctor or a partner, and I'll say, hey, how'd that call go? What could I have done differently? And like, I kid you not, it's right after the call. Like I want that instant gratification. I want that feedback. And so by doing that, I think with my peers and with my supervisors, that builds that rapport, that trust, right? And I think also building credibility, that feedback that you give them goes a lot further. So it's not easy. And I'll tell you, I wish I could tell you, Jaden, like everyone I've given feedback to, and they've taken it really well. And I've been able to give every one of my executives feet now. Absolutely not. Like I'm still working on that. There's no doubt about that. But I think that's the foundation that I've, or the recipe that I've kind of followed, that's allowed me to have that. When I've been able to provide that feedback, that's the recipe I followed that allowed me to get there.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that, if your leaders are taking the same approach as you are, and that like it's very relationship and kind of like coming from a good place, that they're then going to understand, like, even if Ivan doesn't deliver this feedback perfectly to me, one, it's coming from a place where he cares, but then now my responsibility is maybe how to coach him on how to better deliver that feedback in the future, right? Versus like, getting upset or, stuff like that. I think that, I always push people, because I think that coaching up is one of those skills that like sets you apart from the crowd, because it is so uncomfortable that like when someone is comfortable having that uncomfortable conversation. Very similar to what you said earlier, like just throwing yourself into uncomfortable situations and challenges. I can't think of anything more uncomfortable in a professional setting than like trying to coach your boss, right? So, the people who do have those like candid conversations are the people who kind of get a spotlight put on them and are able to grow in that way.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that is impactful there is knowing who the like key opinion leaders are and influencers are of those individuals. Sometimes that message can be conveyed better through a third party, right? Someone that's a confidant or someone that they have a really good relationship with. And you have to be careful because it's teetering the line of like, bad mouthing someone behind their back. That's not the case at all, right? It's always, again, you have to build that trust, build that relationship with like, hey, I've noticed X, Y, and Z is occurring with X individual. How do you think we can convey this message, right? So that can sometimes help. I always say be very careful there because you don't ever want it to come across like you're trying to, talk down on one of your, especially a supervisor or a peer. But yeah, no, I do think it's just you have to build that confidence and that trust with them. And I love the fact that you talked about if you do that to your team, you hope and pray that they'll give it back to you in a thoughtful, meaningful way so that you can improve, even if that message that you delivered wasn't maybe the best sent. That really builds and fosters a culture of continuous improvement, right? We're here to get better at what we do. We're here to elevate each other, right? Like I believe that my success was wholly dependent upon the elevation of the people around me. It wasn't like I'm going to go in there and I'm I'm like a LeBron James, right? Yeah, I'd love to be a LeBron James, but that's not always the recipe for success, right? To be just a superstar doesn't mean you can't be a superstar and play on an amazing team, right? That's not the case at all. But I'm not here to step on others to get to the top, right? And by no means am I saying that King James did that. But for me, it's how do I elevate the people around me? So again, providing that feedback, providing that support in hopes that they get better and more confident at what they do, exactly like what you said, Jaden. And then they're going to give me feedback to make me a better leader. And that's all I can really hope for.
I love that. And I think that's a good note to kind of, close out on. I think we've had some absolutely incredible, dialogue today. So Ivan, if someone in the audience today was moved by kind of your approach, your philosophy, or would just like to network and learn more about you, about specialty dental brands and the great things that you all are doing, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. The best way to get hold of me, and I think really the main way is just get hold of me via LinkedIn. Please send me a message on LinkedIn. I've actually had people even before SDB reach out, just like, hey, I want to talk through, X, Y, or Z. It is one of my favorite things to do. I love learning. I take those experiences not only to share my thoughts and values, but also to like affirm them or change them, right? I get to learn from you all as well. So yeah, please, LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me.
I love that approach. And, kind of as we talked about mentorship earlier, I think that's something that I always, push with like the idea of mentorship is like, even as the mentor, you can gain so much value from it as well. And, just sharing information. But Ivan, just want to say thank you so much for being a guest on the Tips for Team Building podcast, where our mission is to inspire and propel others along in their leadership journeys. Really looking forward to this episode's release and seeing how it does inspire others. And, thanks again for sharing your wisdom with our audience.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Jaden. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to the Tips for Team Building podcast, where we propel others along in their leadership journeys. If you enjoyed the show, would you please subscribe and leave a review wherever you listened? You can also visit www.spiritmco.com to find out more about how Spirit Consulting inspires virtuous leadership. We'll see you next time.